Welcome to the Power of Pleasure podcast. I'm your host, L'Oreal, and I'm on a mission to help you embrace pleasure as a lifestyle. This show is a love letter to all the pleasure life has to offer. And each week, I'll be chatting with friends, loved ones, peers, and people I admire about all things pleasure. Through these conversations, I'm giving you the best tools, resources, and tips to help you create a life that is ooey gooey juicy good, one shift at a time. So buckle up and let's get ready for this week's episode. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, beautiful people, wherever you are. Thank you for joining another episode of the Power of Pleasure podcast. I am your host, L'Oreal Moss, and today we are going to be talking about how astrology can help you not only live by your divine design, but find a career path that actually feels good for you. One where you don't hate your boss, you don't hate your coworkers, and you don't hate going to work every day. And so the guest that is here to help me bring that information to you is Miss Kelly Irene. Welcome, welcome. Kelly is the founder of Most True You. She's an HR director and astrology-based career coach. So welcome to the show. Round of applause. Woo!
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me today. I am still very much a beginner when it comes to astrology. And so when I saw that you were an astrologer, I was like, "Ooh, yay." Because I get to study and I get nerdy and I get to
Yes.
learn things. And so the show is all about pleasure, and I have a goal to show people that pleasure is so much more than just like physical intimacy. It's more than like sex and stuff. Like pleasure is
Mhm.
our birthright, and we deserve to have it in all areas of our life. And a lot of people right now, especially with like the state of affairs, we're still reeling from
Mhm.
elections and everything, and people are
Yeah.
panicking and they're worrying about their jobs, they're worrying about how they're going to make money. And so, what better time than to
Mhm.
have you here to share your journey and your expertise? But before we get into it, I want you to introduce yourself and let the people know a bit about who you are and what you do.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think given where we're at right now and where we're going to be probably when your episodes go live, there's a lot of just tumultuous energy going through for all of us. Pleasure can feel really challenging, and pleasure at work can feel even more challenging, especially because a lot of times we are surrounded by people who we may not have chosen to be surrounded by, and that doesn't always feel great.
Mhm.
So, I am, as you introduced me, I'm the founder of Most True You. I'm an HR director. I still work a full-time job as an HR director, and I love it. I love work. I love my career. I love even the challenging parts of what I get to do. But that's because I've been able to align my career with my personal astrology. And so for me, that came first, the aligning my career with my personal astrology. And as I did that, I started to talk to my friends and my family and say, like, oh, this is what I'm learning. And why don't we look at your chart? And why don't we see how you can be more aligned? And with all of that, I started to do some coaching and started to coach people in their careers. People would come and just be like, I hate going to work every day. It's lonely, it's frustrating, it is sucking the life out of my soul. And I feel like I just have to keep doing it. And so it always would start with, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be soul sucking. And that's really where the power of astrology comes in, is helping us pinpoint what it is that's going to help us make sure that whatever our next move is, whether that's a new job, a new role, or just, some kind of adjustment in our work relationships, it helps us really figure out what is needed so that we don't keep spinning our wheels.
I love that. And so, like, a lot of people who don't really know what astrology is, they look at it
Hmm.
as more of like entertainment. They put it
Yeah.
in the realm of like, those circus palm readers. And, I'm going to
Yeah.
give you your fortune. I'm going to look into my crystal ball and tell you the future. But it's like, it's like science. Like, it's it's a study. It's something that you have to study. And I have seen, people pick it up and run with it, and they have completely done a whole 180 in their lives. And so, could you share a bit about what brought you to astrology? Like, was
Mhm.
it something you were always interested in, or did it just cross your path one day?
Yeah, I can remember I think I was like 9, and I was standing the town I lived in had 1 block from Main Street. And I was standing on Main Street looking across the street, and I saw this sign that said something like, you have the painting on the windows. It said like magic, astrology, something else, and astrology caught my eye. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but I love stars. I know it has to do with stars. That's so interesting. But I go to church, so I can't be interested in that.
Mhm.
And as a
Mhm.
9-year-old, I knew that astrology was off limits based on my church background. And I carried that with me well into adulthood. I was married to a pastor. We definitely didn't do astrology as, that part of my life. Um, and I ended up, so went through the early part of my adult life. I ended up being divorced, single mom, no community, lost my church community as part of that. And that's a whole story on its own. But what happened at that point was I went into spiritual hibernation. I felt like there was so much wrong with me. All these things that had led me to the point where I found myself, like I said, divorced, single mom, no community, broke. My mom was helping me pay rent because I couldn't pay it on my own. Just so lonely and frustrated and lost. And I shut down spiritually. And I did that for 2 years. And during that time, my focus was survival with my kids. And I have to create a career that makes money because now I'm the only moneymaker. And that's how I got into HR to begin with. And I loved what I was doing in my career. It was challenging. I was learning. It was great, but there was still this like dead space within me spiritually. And I was invited to a moon circle. And I'm like, I don't know what that is, but whatever. We'll try this. We'll see what this is. So I went to this moon circle. And in that, we started talking about the phases of the moon. We started talking about our moon sign. I had never heard of a moon sign before, right? In astrology, it's always your sun sign. And I started to see there's different layers to it. And it kind of awakened something within me that had been asleep for a while. And within that, I started to dig in and go, okay, if my moon sign is awakening something within me, maybe there's more to this. Maybe this thing that I had shut off back when I was 9 because of my religious upbringing, maybe there's something to it. And so I just went into it very curiously. What is astrology? And started to see, and we can get into that. I don't want to go too far down that path if you're not ready to
Mhm.
yet, but
Mhm.
that was really what brought me into it was this space of previously astrology had been taboo because of religion. But even at that time, and as I was learning about it, it was also taboo because I was so focused on building my career, and professional people don't talk about astrology either.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
now, I'm going to fast forward and jump ahead a minute. Now, one of my missions is to bust the taboo on astrology in the workplace because I've seen how powerful it is. But I want to pause and just see, I can go on forever, but I don't want to hog that too much.
No, I love that, and I was gonna ask you, like I know maybe like this much about astrology,
Hmm.
and I only recently, like within the last 3, 4 years, even started allowing myself to learn more about it. Not because
Hmm.
I felt like it was taboo, but just because those charts are scary looking. And
Yep.
they're kind of like overwhelming. It's like, oh my God, how am I supposed to read all of this? But I got an astrology reading some years ago, like a natal chart reading, and I thought it was really interesting the things that she was able to pick up on about me, just by looking at this complex, weird
Hmm.
looking diagram. And I thought it was really interesting. But I never really knew how to apply any of that to what I was already doing. And so for people who are interested in it or may even know a little bit about it, but they want to know how this can help them change their career or advance in their career, are there specific signs or placements that they need to be aware of? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 3 signs that I always start with, and I actually have a free guide that people can look up their signs. The first is our sun sign. Most people, if I say, what's your sign? You're going to tell me I'm an Aquarius or I'm Gemini or I'm Cancer. And that's referring to where the sun was when you were born. And the sun stays in the same sign for like 29 days. So you have this really broad grouping of people that can all say, oh, I'm Cancer, and be very, very different people. And that's because of all the complexities that we see in a chart. So we always start with the sun sign. That's how you're meant to shine, what lights you up, kind of that first part of your personality. And then we look at your moon sign, and that gets at, what do you need in life? What do you need to feel satisfied, safe? What do you need to feel successful at work? It gets into, how do you tune into your intuition and your emotions? And that's something that I find for most people is a lot harder to kind of dig into, because we're taught to tune out our own needs
Yes.
and always be aware of the needs of others. And so this is like one of the most helpful, but also one of the most challenging signs for people. But it's really helpful. And the moon changes signs like every 2.5 days. So where you have the sun at 29 days in one sign, the moon is in a sign for only 2.5 days. And then the third one is your rising or ascendant. And that's where the eastern horizon is at the moment that you're born. And we go through all 12 zodiac signs in a day. So that changes like every 2 hours. So you can have two people
Wow.
born on the same day, but have two different rising signs. Their sun and moon might be the same. Their rising is going to be different. And our rising sign is our filter or our lens that we process the world through. So this is the way that when we show up at work or in a new relationship or any kind of a different context than what we're used to, it's, what are the questions that we're asking to begin with? What are the things that we need to know in order to move forward with whatever we're doing? And so whenever I'm looking at someone's chart, I always start there. Or if someone's saying, where do I begin with astrology? I always start there. Get to know your sun, moon, and rising sign. There's so many other things that we can look at, but knowing those three can really then help you go, okay, my job, is this aligned with how I'm meant to shine and with what lights me up? Is it aligned with my needs? Am I able to feel safe and satisfied? Am I able to feel successful in my job? And am I able to do so in that way that I uniquely need? And then am I able to process well the things that I'm going through on a daily basis at work? So if you have, somebody, for example, who has strong Virgo placement or is a Virgo rising, if you give them a job to do, they're going to go, okay, I need to know step 1, 2, and 3, and then I can go do it. Whereas somebody maybe who has Aries rising, you give them a job to do, they're going to be like, I've already done it. I already knew that was coming, so I just did it. Right. So these are kind of different ways of filtering the world around you that really impacts the way that we show up at work.
That that is a lot in the best way. Because a lot it's really interesting, especially when you talk about like the moon sign and stuff. I think because a lot of environments don't really allow for emotion to play a role in anything. And so knowing that you can, allow your emotions and your feelings and like what you need emotionally to guide you in your work, I feel like that is so powerful and it could potentially be really freeing to people.
Yeah.
Especially if you're looking to change careers. I know for a lot of people like myself, I work in corporate.
Hmm.
I absolutely know that the current job is not the right one, just because of the limitations and it's just very boxed in.
Yeah.
Um, but like, what are some tips that you can offer to someone who wants to maybe switch positions, or maybe they even want to just change the way they show up? Maybe they don't hate their job, but they don't feel like they're showing up authentically as themselves at work. So, what are some tips you can offer to help them navigate those spaces better?
I think the first one would be really spend time getting to know yourself, getting to know who you are through your birth chart. And then really pay attention to, where is it safe for me to show up as this person and where is it not? Because the reality is there are some work environments where it's not safe to show up as your authentic self. And there's a lot where it is, right? So there's some discernment that has to happen there. And then where it is safe to show up as your authentic self, just start doing
Mhm.
it.
I
Just
appreciate that. And so, like I mentioned before, the charts can look, scary. And so for maybe a first timer who, wants to go get their chart, or they just want to take the first steps to figuring out how they can incorporate astrology, right? So you've given them the three signs to start with, but what are maybe a couple of steps you can give them to like really start figuring out how to align their career goals with their personal values using astrology?
I think looking at the chart and maybe listing out what are the things that stand out the most to you. So, as you're going through your chart, let's say for me, my sun is in Aquarius. So, I shine in places where I can make room for the people I like to call the misfits and mystics, right? The people who are outside the box. Um, my moon is in Capricorn. So, I need to be climbing mountains, figuratively, literally, whatever. And then my rising sign is in Libra. So I have this filter that's always looking at how can I bring chaos or beauty out of chaos, or how can I bring balance and integration where things are out of whack. And so I had to do this for myself, looking at my career and going, okay, at one point I was an HR manager for a wealth management firm. Wealth management is not for the mystics and misfits. It's not for the people who are on the outside of society. It's not for what's good for the community. It's what's good
Mhm.
for a select few. And so
Mhm.
I had to realize right off the bat, my entire role was out of alignment with what's important to me. At that time, changing my job was not the answer. And so I had to go find another way to do that. And that, was through, okay, let's make sure that our ERG, our employee resource group, is really helping somebody other than ourselves. Let's make sure that we are doing volunteer activities in the community. Right. So there's ways that you can look at this and go, okay, here's my value. My value is community. It's people who are not necessarily helped by society, those who are left behind by the way that our societal structures work. And so even if the job itself is out of alignment with that, where is a place that I can bring alignment? Where is a place that I can do that? With my rising sign being in Libra and having that like ability to integrate kind of opposing views is a very Libra thing. It can be a peacemaker. In my role within HR, I realized, okay, this is something that can be a superpower and I don't have to be afraid of it. I can, I'm really good at taking to, if there's a personnel issue, going, all right, this is what you need. This is what you need. Let's bridge the gap. So there's ways that as you're going through your chart, going back to what I started with, jot down what pops out to you. What's important to me? Where do I see this already happening? Where do I see opportunities for this? And even if it's not a directly aligned opportunity, just being able to find one thing is going to help you with that. It's not going to solve everything right away, but it's going to help you if you feel like, okay, like for me, being able to organize those volunteer activities, that helped me be more aligned with my sun sign, even though the job itself was still very much out of alignment with who I truly am. The change away from that came at a later time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that made a lot of sense. And it was really interesting because our moon signs and rising signs are reversed. And so it was
Mm.
really interesting hearing like how you were able to take that and approach it and use it in a way that really felt good and made sense. So thank you for sharing that. And so I guess to kind of, for the sake of keeping things simple, for people who are just getting started with, astrology and they really want to just maybe test it out, approach it from curiosity, like you said. Are there any positions that you would recommend for each sun sign, just based on that alone? I hope that's not like a huge question.
It's funny because it's a yes and a no, because
Uh
with
huh.
your sun sign, I could say, all right, for example, someone who has an Aquarius sun sign, they're really going to feel aligned if they're in a place where they can be an activist, a community manager, doing something communal and something that honors that kind of renegade rebel spirit within them. Somebody who has an Aries sign is a leader. They need to be able to lead. They need to be able to take initiative. So I could, there's yes I think we can do that, but we also, that's where the moon and the rising are so important because, for
Mhm.
example, with me being an Aquarius sun, I'm not in a role where I'm an activist because that's not fully aligned with my other placements.
Mm. Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but there is that like kind of rebel renegade bent to what I'm doing in my role because it's, it's working with the startup company. It's we provide therapy and medication management for Medicare and Medi-Cal patients or clients.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so it's that we're working on the outskirts of society. We're working for the good of people who've been left behind by society structures. And so there is that element of activism, but it's not that direct activist kind of a job. So I think
Mhm.
there's definitely a lot of benefit to looking at something like that. I don't have it where I could just pop it off the top of my head.
No worries. I figured it was worth a shot.
Yeah,
You
it'd be
just
interesting to put that. Now I'm like, oh, maybe I want to make a little list of that.
yeah, I think that was something that would be beneficial for sure. Especially since a lot of people they only know like what their sun sign is. I just
Yeah.
recently found out about like rising sign and moon, like rising sign, moon sign, like your Venus and like all this stuff, and it's like
Hmm.
what? And then you're getting into like stelliums and all that, and it's it's a lot, but it's really
A
interesting. It's a
lot.
lot in a good way.
Yeah.
Just figuring out how to find the right support in helping to understand that. And so, on that note, when you are working, like, do you work with clients individually as well as working your full time job?
Yeah, I do coaching as well. So typically, what that looks like is we start the very first session by reading the birth chart together. We go over the sun, moon, and rising. We look at there's different placements that we can look at in your chart for career information. And then from there, we go, all right, we spend about 3 months together looking at how are you in alignment? How are you not? Where can we bring that now? And then if it makes sense for the person to seek a promotion or a raise, ask for new, leadership responsibilities, look for a new job. That's where the kind of practical side of the coaching comes in. But it always starts with that let's get to know you at the core of who you are. Let's uncover that person because so often there's so many layers that we've had to wear to be successful at work. So kind of getting to the bottom of those and then moving forward from there.
That's really interesting. In that a common thread that I'm seeing with all the guests that I've interviewed so far for the show, like everything, especially every good thing, it comes down to like self awareness
Yes.
and knowing who you are, knowing what you want, being honest about that. And it makes me smile because it's like it doesn't matter what tools you use, it doesn't matter what modalities you study, if you're studying, different spiritual modalities, it doesn't matter what certifications or degrees you have. It's like if you don't know who you are,
Yeah.
then none of it really matters. And you'll
Yeah.
find yourself in situations where you're unhappy or, just
Yeah.
feeling stuck constantly.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you bringing it all back to that and saying, like, that is the starting point. Before we do
Yes.
anything else, we have to get absolutely clear on who you are, and what you want, what that looks like, so on and so
Yeah.
forth. Mm.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people are starting to hear more about this, but we're going into
Mhm.
the age of Aquarius. So this is kind of a new astrological energy that's coming into play. And Aquarius is both very communal, very community oriented, in the sense of let's find what's good for the whole. And it's very much about who am I as a person? Who is my authentic self? What is my purpose? And so I think that for a lot of people, without, knowing that connection, they're still sensing that awakening to this. There has to be purpose involved in this. There has to be individuality. There has to be me as my true self because the age that we're coming out of is you need to fit into the group. You need to not stand out as different. You need to do this the way that everybody else does it. And that's how most of us grew up is
Mhm.
show up, don't make waves, don't
Yep.
be too loud, don't be bossy, don't be, you know, don't be the weirdo. And Aquarius is teaching us there's a lot of value to being the weirdo. There's a lot of value to being the one who stands out and stands up.
Mhm.
And, you know, I mean, there's so much more that we could say about that, but I do think that's a huge part of why there is that common thread, that it's no longer, the common thread is no longer fit in with the group. It's you need to figure out who you are so that you can move forward as that person.
Mhm.
And that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. And I wanted to touch on, like, you mentioned community, and there's so much talk about community and like we need to gather and we need to organize and all of that. And not to minimize any of it, but it's like we've been here before. We've
Mm-hmm.
been here before. We've seen it before. We've heard it before. A lot of the things that people are wanting to create are things that have already been done. They just were not sustained. And so from that aspect of people wanting to create community or find community, is there a certain um, placement or a certain house that they should look in to figure out what kind of community is best and how they would best contribute?
Yes, I go directly to the 11th house. That's our house of community and friendships. And so for somebody who has, so for example, my Libra rising, I have a Leo in the 11th house. And I always use the analogy of a campfire. That's my community, is I want people to gather around the campfire and talk and have that vulnerability and that depth of connection. And so when I'm creating community, it has to have that vibe. But that's not the case for everybody. And not everybody
Mhm.
wants community that way. So I would look at the 11th house and I would look at, okay, what sign is on the 11th house? What are the energies of that sign? And then how do I see that in my desire for community and friendship? If there's any planets or placements in the 11th house, those are going to add flavor and depth to that. So if you have Saturn, for example, in the 11th house, you're going to need a lot more structure to your community. You're going to want to have more boundaries with your community. Whereas if you have Venus in the 11th house, that's your sign of pleasure and fun and beauty and femininity. And so that's going to flavor your community. So it's very, very much about the 11th house is my starting point for looking at community and friendship.
I love that. And could you speak really quickly to what? Because I know that this question is going to come up, and I'm not
Mhm.
going to be able to answer it. But what does it mean if you have a house that is empty, like there's nothing in it? Because that's not necessarily. I know it's not necessarily a bad thing, but some
Mhm.
people freak out when they look at their chart and they don't see anything
Yep.
inside of those spaces.
You're always going to have at least one house that's empty. There's not enough planets or placements to fill every single house. Um, you still, even if you don't have a placement, which when I say placement, I just mean, is there a planet in that house? And we're going to include the sun and the moon. They're not planets, but we're going to include them in that. Um, so if there's not a placement in that house, it just means it's more of a whole unto itself energy. So we'll go back to my 11th house. I have Leo in there. I don't have anything else in the 11th house. It's just Leo. And so it's my 11th house is Leo energy through and through. It doesn't have anything else in it. Now I can look and see if there's other placements around it and see how those are going to interact with it. But the reality is there's always going to be at least one house without something in it, sometimes multiple. And that house is still just as important because, like I said, it's still going to have whatever zodiac sign covers that house.
Thank you for speaking to that because
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not the expert and I know the questions are going to come and I don't want to leave you hanging, but I don't have the answer. So I wanted to go ahead and ask because I know what's going to happen.
That's a
Um,
good one.
and so thank you. And so with everything that's currently going on and people looking to shift careers and join community and things like that, what are just some basic tips that you can give to help people relax and like
Hmm.
step out of the chaos and the panic so that they can make
Mm.
better informed decisions? And how does astrology play a role in that?
Yeah, I think the chaos and panic, especially for those who are feeling it, I totally get it. I have felt it as well. So I don't want
Mhm.
to invalidate that. I think there's a reason that we feel that way. Things are really, really scary for a lot of people right now. Um, with that, it doesn't have to be a helpless, scary 100%. I think that the more that we get to know ourselves and those around us, whether it's through astrology or through some other system, the
Mhm.
more that we can trust who we are and who they are. And I think that's going to be a key going forward, is being able to trust each other and be discerning enough to know who we can't trust, right? There's going to be people who we can't trust. Um,
Mhm.
but just in terms of tips on how to use astrology to help quell some of the panic, I think one is, this is going to blow over at some point, but the reality is when it does, it's going to look very different. We are in a period right now, from now through really 2027, that is ushering in huge changes. And for those in power, they are going to do everything that they can to hold on to that power at all costs.
Mhm.
And that
Mhm.
is going to create a lot of pain for a lot of people. And we get to be the ones who are going, look, instead of wasting our time trying to hold on to old ways, we get to make new ways of being. And that is where I would recommend the focus be, is what do you want life to look like when this is said and done? Because it's not going to look like it did pre this election, pre the last election, pre the election before that. We're never going to be able to go back. We can only go forward. And so, what do we want that to look like? And what can we do to make that happen? And then, where we can't make that happen, how are we going to choose to interact with that reality? And that's where I think our astrology can be so helpful, because it can help us focus in on, okay, if I know my sun, moon, and rising signs, I know what's important to me. I can focus on those energies because that's my superpower. That's what I
Mhm.
can do, rather than
Mhm.
trying to um, do things in a different way that's not in alignment with those superpowers. I don't know if that's actually like, I mean, I don't know how practical that feels, but I think that's kind of our day to day choice, is what do we want to make of what's happening? And
Mhm.
what are we going to contribute to the future?
Mhm.
Um, and then in terms of jobs, I don't know, let me pause there. Does that feel helpful, or does that still feel too like airy and nebulous?
No, that made a lot of sense to me because the way that I interpreted it is basically focused on what we can control,
Yeah.
right? Like if we can't control, like I feel like our duty, like as spiritual beings having a human experience, is not to try to control and manipulate everything,
Hmm.
but it's to experience and to like respond to the things that are happening.
Yeah.
And like just like you said, figure out what your superpowers are. What is it that you want out of life? What do you want your life to look like? And then taking steps to make that happen instead of
Yeah.
focusing on all of the other things out of your control. And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean bypassing or acting like
Yeah.
these things aren't happening, but it's really choosing where your energy is going to go, like where your energy
Yeah.
and your focus is going to be.
Yeah.
And I personally believe that doing that will help you be able to better respond to the things you can't control. Like it
Yeah.
all just kind of builds on each other. So that's how I interpreted what you said.
Yeah. And here's a really practical example. I have a friend who she has both very strong Cancer placements and Virgo. So she feels very deeply. That's that Cancer
Mhm.
placement.
Mhm.
And she can get stuff done. And she can she's really good with the details. That's that Virgo placement. And so I have seen her multiple times over the past like 15 years go, oh my gosh, I'm feeling the panic. I'm feeling the despair. I'm feeling the powerlessness of everything that's happening around us. And then she goes, here's the one thing I can do. When all the stuff was happening as we were pulling out of Afghanistan as a military, she had friends who were living there, Pakistani friends, and or I'm sorry, Afghani friends. And she mobilized like 20 of us and said, you are helping this person, you are helping this person, you are helping this person, you are helping this person. And she created a checklist for us. And together, the 20 of us were able to help get a bunch of people out of the country who had previously been helping the United States military and were therefore
Wow.
targets, and who the military was going to give zero aid to. And so that's her superpower. She can figure out those details, figure out what needs to get done, mobilize people, make it happen. But it started with that depth of feeling. And so that's a really practical example of, you can have the
Mhm.
feels, they're totally legitimate. Um, and you can find your one thing. That was her one thing. Did she change everybody's life? No. Did she save everybody? No. But for those several families who we were able to help because of her using her superpowers, she changed everything for them. So I hope that's helpful. That's, maybe a more practical example of what I'm talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and that's amazing. And I think too, like people really, I would encourage and invite people to not look at their contributions as being minimal,
Yes.
because a lot of people
Yeah.
are great at so many things, and because they're so good at it and it comes easily to them, it's easy to dismiss it as
Yep.
not being a big deal. But you really will be surprised at how many people are lacking that skill. How many people just can't do it. Doesn't matter how many videos they watch, how many classes they take, they just cannot do it with the same level of finesse, but they just can't do it at all. And so
Yeah.
that would be my invitation, based on what you said. So I
I love
appreciate
that. I
that.
think that's so true. We oftentimes don't see our own skills because they come so naturally. And so we write them off. We're like, oh, it's not that big of a
Mhm.
deal. It
Mhm.
is a big deal.
Mhm.
It's your superpower.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. I want to talk more about this, but like this could be one of those things that goes on forever because I have all the questions and I know that you have like all the answers. But
Some of them.
um, but I do want to ask because I can see and I can feel how passionate you are about this work and that you absolutely use it in every aspect of your life. And so I'm sure that astrology and just your studies and the way that you move in general have helped you create healthy boundaries and really,
Mhm.
figure yourself out and just put yourself in a position where you're not willing to like bend or falter on what makes you happy in life. And
Mm.
so, on that note, I'd like to ask you, what is your non negotiable pleasure principle?
Ease. For me, it has to be easeful. And that doesn't mean necessarily easy, but it means I'm not fighting myself in that moment. That's the kind of ease that I'm talking about. If it doesn't feel easeful, then I know it's out of alignment and I know I'm not going to get any pleasure out of it.
Mm, thank you. And my last question, what does pleasure feel like for you?
I feel it in my core. It's like a physical sensation between my heart space and my root center or my pelvic area. Just that, like, it feels strong, it feels centered, it feels exuberant and light. And that comes through if I'm laughing with my friends or sitting around the campfire in my happy place or doing something creative or coaching or whatever it is. It's literally a physical, energetic sensation that I feel in the core of my being.
I love that so much. And thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me and just share your expertise with the audience today. It really has meant a lot.
Mm.
And I know that there are people who are listening, their interest is sparked. They want the interview to keep going. They want to know how they can get in touch with you. So, how can they follow you online or reach out to become a client?
So the number one place I would say to go is mosttrueyou.com/guide. And that's where people can get access to this guide that I've created. How do you find your sun, moon, and rising sign? What do you do with it when you found it? It's like literally a step by step, and it's really beautiful. Um, and then I'm on Instagram, mosttrueyou.com. And then if they're interested in kind of a next step, I have this really incredible alignment assessment that I do. It's a 45-minute call, and we go through 5 key areas of your life, and we identify where are you most aligned with your true self and where are you not, and then what can we do about it. It's free. It's, to me, it's like one of my favorite things I do, because whether somebody ends up working with me or not, they walk away from that call going, oh my gosh, now this makes sense. Now I know where to go from here. So that's something that can be, it's also on that same exact page, mosttrueyou.com/guide.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will make sure to have all of that in the show notes and everything and on the site so that people don't miss out and they can absolutely keep in touch and reach out to you. But again, thank you so much for your time today. This has been enlightening. I feel so much smarter um, as a result of speaking with you. And it's definitely, the wheels are turning. I got some things that I want to go look at in my chart now. So I
Cool.
appreciate you.
Thanks, L'Oreal. I appreciate you. Thanks for making the space for this.
Of course, no problem. Well, I'm hoping that we get a chance to talk again in the future. And I wish you the absolute best, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this week's episode of the Power of Pleasure podcast. Make sure to check the website, powerofpleasurepodcast.substack.com. On the site, not only will you find some blog posts and other helpful tools to help you continue the mission, you'll also be able to access the show notes as well as any social links and resources from this week's guest. While you're at it, if you found this information valuable, which I'm sure you did in some way, go ahead and take a few moments to leave a rating or review wherever you're listening to this episode and share out on social. I hope to see you next week for another episode of the show. And in the meantime, in between time, go out and do one thing today to help you embrace pleasure as a lifestyle.